How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be taking a look at Fear Street Cheerleaders, the first one called, well, appropriately, The First Evil. This is part of a trilogy of books put out by R.L. Stine in 1992. That was the same year Goosebumps started going, so Goosebumps and then introducing the Fear Street Cheerleaders, who would become some of the most iconic characters in the Fear Street series. Yeah, 92 was a good year for Stine. Once Fear Street got going, he started doing several of these trilogies. I think every year there'd be another trilogy or something like that. And the Cheerleaders was the first one, and Simon Pulse just gave us this really nice bind-up of all three of the original trilogy. I will say they did do more cheerleader stories. There were two more in the Super Chillers, and then there was one more in the A Fear Street novel series, the new Fear Street books that came out right before the return. I know the last one is still in print, but I really hope that after this, Simon Pulse gives us a bind-up of the two Super Chiller stories, because those can be a little hard to find. But the original trilogy is all here. Really glad to pick it up and read it. The cheerleader books can be a little hard to find on the used market. I've been looking through my half-price books, and I've only been able to find the second Evil, so really good with books that go together to have them all in one place. Really excited for that. And overall, this is a really good story. You see why the cheerleaders became so iconic. I was a little worried going into this, like I knew everyone said it was good, but I'm not the biggest sports guy. I'm from Texas, but I actually don't care much about football. But it still absorbed me. And I'm also not the biggest into that whole Mean Girls thing. But again, it still absorbed me, and the drama, you get some of this whenever writers write high school drama that's just so not great. But here, when we get the conflict, we see where all the characters are coming from. And yeah, one of the girls is pretty mean, but you see why she feels entitled, so the drama does work out pretty well. The scares, though, that gets pretty cool. I will say, this book's actually divided into 3 sections. It's actually kind of weird. Not only does he divide it into sections, he also gives all the chapters chapter names, which Stine doesn't usually do. It's usually just one. But with the 3 sections, the first 2, you get some scares. You get like scenes where like locker doors start flipping open, or there's a football player and he gets injured and they think it might be part of some curse or something. There is a little bit of magic, a little bit of supernatural horror, but it's not super big in those first 2 chapters. It's all about Stine setting up his characters and getting to know them and understand the drama. And I really am glad that he did a lot of work setting up these characters, because hopefully that means in books 2 and 3, we'll have them all ready to go, we'll know them, and then we can just plunge them into crazy adventures. I am really curious what it will be like having returning characters, because, you had Corey and Lisa who would make cameo appearances, but, I really want to see, a full book with these same characters again. I basically can't wait for Second Evil. But even though the first 2 acts are character-driven and not so much horror, that third act, though, I will say, the second act ends on a sentence. The very last sentence of part 2 just drops this bombshell, and then Act 3 goes crazy. It gets really dark with a very dark moment, like right at the beginning of 3, and then it gets to be absolute insanity. And I have noticed sometimes the Fear Street books do this, but you get just this big over-the-top crazy finale right at the end, and Stine really likes to swing for it at the end of Fear Street novels. And this is really cool with a really interesting villain. I don't want to spoil too much. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the plot. I'm not going to do any major spoilers, but I do want to say my piece on a few plot points and take a moment to analyze a few things in specifics, but I won't go near the end, and I'll try not to say too much that I don't have to. But anyway, we open up with Corky and Bobby. They're two sisters, and they're moving into a house on Fear Street. The house is really cool. It's a rundown kind of haunted-looking house, and they don't quite feel comfortable in it. Doesn't play a huge part in the story, but still cool. And they're professional-grade cheerleaders. At their old school, they were on ESPN even. So yeah, they're not just cheerleaders, they're big-time cheerleaders. And they transferred to Shadyside too late to do the cheerleading tryouts, but the girls are going to make an exception for them because, yeah, they are the real deal, even though not all the team feels like they should make an exception. But when they see their audition, it's hard to turn them down because they're leaps and bounds above everybody else. Well, once they're on the team, they're going into the game in their bus, and there's a tragic bus accident. It's a rainy day. The bus starts to skid into the Fear Street Cemetery, of all places, and it crashes, and one of the girls goes flying out and smacks right into Sarah Fear's grave. I have to admit, when I saw that name, I was really excited. In the other Fear Street books, you get little bits and pieces of lore, but to actually see, like, oh man, we're right there on Sarah Fear's grave, that was really cool. Now, I haven't read them yet, but Simon Pulse, they put out the Fear Street Saga as a trilogy bind-up as well, which I think was actually the second trilogy, and I think that's all about the Fear family. That's way in the past, and I do like, setting that up here, and I'm glad I read this one first. I like the idea of teasing something and say, hey, look, here's the Fear family. What were they about? They're all dead. There's Sarah Fear and 4 other graves that are all beside her that all died in the same year, but their names are worn away. That is a good setup for your next trilogy there. That's really cool, and I'm gonna read through all the cheerleader stories, and then I'm gonna read through the last 2 single reprints I have to go to. But after that, I think I've read enough to appreciate the Fear Street Saga, so I think after that I'm going to jump into to Saga. But anyway, surprisingly enough, the girl that flies out of the bus is okay, but she's in a wheelchair now. She was the captain, and she obviously can't captain anymore. She can't do the cheers, so they actually appoint Bobby as the new captain, which is going to be a bit of drama. And I hinted at this earlier, the drama in this book isn't too just out of nowhere, and I think that might be what gets me, is sometimes high school drama is just written out of nowhere and characters are way too spiteful, but you do get the drama that these girls cause really having lots of understandable roots. For example, they come in too late and they're not supposed to be able to audition, and you get that, like, the team would want these people. They're professionals. They're legit. They were on ESPN. They're simply better than you. But at the same time, when they come in, the youngest girl gets bumped off to be a backup, and it's like, yeah, these girls deserve to cheer, but it's going to come at someone else's expense. So it's kind of a mixed feeling of emotions when you get these 2 really good players on your team, because you have to bump someone off. And also, when the bus gets in a wreck, the only reason the bus was anywhere near Fear Street was because the two girls forgot their special fire batons at home. So they're partially to blame for the wreck, partially the bus driver, because you gotta drive really careful on rainy roads. But you see how they're building up some tension, and then of course, one of the girls who had been there the longest, Kimberly, she thinks she deserves to be captain, but the other girl is again simply better. And that is sort of a thing where you can really understand the bitterness, wanting to work so hard, feeling like, you know, you've been there and you put in the hours, and then someone comes along who is just better than you. You see where her resentment comes from, even though, yeah, Kimberly can be very, very mean in this book. You do see where it's coming from, and I do like that all the emotion and all the dramatic tension, it does come from an earned place. Again, even though Kimberly can be really mean sometimes, I do like that, you know, these girls are kind of put in this awkward situation, and I do like the idea that Bobby's trying to lead the team, but it's not going to be the easiest thing ever to keep morale up and keep your people following you. That's an interesting thing. And again, as I said earlier, the actual scares, this is Fear Street, there are some scares sprinkled throughout the middle of this book, and to be honest, the graveyard crash scene, while being real world horror, was pretty horrific. The idea that it would be a normal day, but the rain, there's something off, and then this big crash. And I loved that we get some time with the Fear Street Cemetery, a really cool place that I wish we would go to more. And seeing Sarah Fear's grave and the lore, there's lots of cool stuff before that third act. But then we get to that third act, and I really want to zip my lips here and not say too much. But if you like when Stine goes big and over the top for the third act, this is one of those cases with this big, crazy moment that I'm like, man, if they tried to film this in the 90s, I don't know what they could do. Like, I hope Netflix adapts the Cheerleaders Trilogy next. Like, they really should. And I would love if they were more faithful this time, but I would love to see something like this. I don't know what Netflix would do. The movies were really unfaithful to the books, but I would really love to see this on screen is what I'm saying. It's a big, epic, cinematic moment. So, yeah, it's a really, really cool ending. And plus, you know, sometimes when Stine does this, when he goes big and over the top at the end, it kind of comes out of nowhere. But this is Cheerleaders. This is part one of a trilogy. It really does feel like, yeah, this is one of those books that should have a big over-the-top moment. So I really did appreciate that. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Fear Street playlist. I've talked about a lot of the single reprints. I covered the whole beginning bind-up. And I did the movies before I read the books, so those will be in there as well. Anyway, I'll try to get to part 2 pretty soon. Have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Fear Street playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.